you ever stopped to consider that the real threat to our species isn't a lack of intelligence, but a silent cognitive infection? Consider this scenario: a respected researcher spreading lies, an admired educator supporting hate speech, a loving father putting his children at risk. All of this not out of malice, but from a peculiar form of ignorance that operates in the shadows of our mind. This isn't the conventional ignorance we easily identify in people around us every day. We're talking about a hidden force that transforms talented individuals into manipulable instruments of invisible powers. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German Protestant theologian, witnessed exactly this during the Nazi regime in the 1940s. His observation didn't record inhuman monsters, but ordinary people living their lives in apparently normal ways: neighbors, colleagues, and religious leaders transforming into tools of brutality through what he called operational stupidity. The most disturbing aspect of this revolutionary discovery: it isn't limited to others or to the past. It's happening to us at this exact moment as you read or listen to these words. Understanding this theory may be the difference between preserving your mental freedom or becoming just another manipulated piece. Our traditional understanding leads us to associate stupidity with low intellectual capacity, a simplified representation of obvious ignorance. However, this perception functions as comforting camouflage that prevents us from seeing the frightening truth before our eyes. The form of stupidity that genuinely compromises autonomy is refined, penetrating, and fundamentally collective in its nature. It doesn't just lodge in isolated individuals, but infiltrates the most respected social structures and institutions. It expresses itself through automated behaviors, convictions absorbed without critical examination, norms that everyone follows without understanding. At this level, stupidity transcends individual failure, operating as a large-scale sociological phenomenon with devastating impact. It functions like a mental pathogen that propagates through culture, educational systems, and established organizations. Once assimilated, it transforms common sense into an invisible but absolutely effective cage for imprisoning minds. People cease reasoning not from incapacity, but from lack of necessity, since society reasons for them. The conventional pattern becomes unquestionable moral guidance, replacing individual internal compass with a collective and manipulable one. The socially acceptable transmutes into absolute moral code that no one dares challenge without suffering serious social consequences. The justification everyone does it this way becomes perfect legitimation for any behavior, however questionable it may be. More alarming, this stupidity is pragmatic, serves established interests, maintaining order, stability, and power hierarchies. Questioning individuals represent danger. Excessive reflection slows down the mechanism, threatens the smooth functioning of social gears. The machinery requires submissive components, not restless spirits, who ask too many inconvenient questions to be answered honestly. Thus, the perfect citizen is manufactured for any power structure, democratic, authoritarian, or corporate in its nature. Someone who consumes without questioning, votes mechanically, shares content automatically, manifests indignation within tolerated parameters. Someone who confuses having an opinion with thinking, even when that opinion was implanted by algorithms or media personalities. The devastating result? A multitude of individuals convinced of their critical sense, when in reality they're interpreting a script. A society where stupidity isn't an anomaly, but the structural foundation upon which everything is built. Those who try to escape are labeled as presumptuous, conspiratorial, or dangerous extremists who threaten the established order. Therein lies the real risk. When stupidity ceases to be perceived as a deficiency and begins to be celebrated, when questioning is considered hostile, when deep thought is interpreted as intolerable intellectual arrogance to others. This is how a generation is shaped that masters information, except the ability to think autonomously. In 1943, confined in a Nazi cell, Bonhoeffer produced reflections that today sound prophetic. Imprisoned for conspiring against Hitler, he no longer identified malevolence as the primary risk of his dark era. What he detected was more devastating: stupidity as a morally active force, socially legitimized by the masses. Bonhoeffer observed ordinary, educated, religious, well-intentioned individuals becoming collaborators in an unprecedented murderous system. Not from innate perversity, but because they had lost their capacity for moral discernment and independent judgment. They obeyed blindly, believed without questioning, echoed propaganda without any critical filter that could protect them from manipulation. And when someone brave contested the atrocities, it was these ordinary people who pointed violent accusations, not soldiers. He wrote, "Stupidity is a more dangerous adversary of good than institutionalized evil itself. Against evil we can react. It can be denounced. It can be prevented by physical force and resistance. Against collective stupidity, we are completely without effective defense or combat strategy that works long-term." This statement wasn't rhetorical exaggeration, but diagnosis of a system where thought had been outsourced. Bonhoeffer saw teachers defending Nazi doctrines, doctors participating in inhumane experiments, citizens denouncing innocent Jewish neighbors, not from deliberate cruelty, but because they had become unconscious agents of the totalitarian and murderous regime. They didn't kill directly, they just believed the ideas of those who killed and executed the orders. And most frightening, they were proud of it, because within the collective logic of the time, they were doing the right thing. The stupidity described by Bonhoeffer wasn't intellectual dumbness, but blind obedience to authorities and the system. And when obedience unites with deactivated intellect, the perfect environment for totalitarianism is created. This is the crucial point. Stupidity as a moral decision, as capitulation of individual conscience to narrative comfort. A capitulation that transforms any person, however intelligent, educated, or sensitive, into a useful piece of destruction. Bonhoeffer was executed weeks before the war's end, but his theory remained alive. Not as a warning about the past, but as an instrument to decipher the present we live in now. Because what he witnessed in 1943 continues alive today in ready-made speeches, in thoughts delegated to third parties, in certainties that no one dares examine with depth and intellectual honesty. The question he left us wasn't whether you're good or bad, but something deeper. The real question is, are you still thinking for yourself, or just repeating what you've been told? Bonhoeffer didn't just offer criticism, he offered a complete analysis, and perhaps a curse for those who understand it. Because after grasping its profound meaning, it becomes impossible to see the world in the same naive way. According to his analysis, stupidity doesn't constitute cognitive deficiency, but a serious and dangerous ethical condition. A state in which the person abandons authorship of their own convictions and acts according to external instructions, even firmly believing they act by their own will, free and autonomous, when in reality they're a marionette. It's not about low IQ or lack of access to information available in abundance. It's about internal disposition to reason independently, critically, and truly free from influences. This disposition evaporates when the individual renounces critical judgment in exchange for belonging, security, or convenience. Bonhoeffer perceived something devastating about human nature in periods of crisis, fear, and intense social instability. Human beings tend to seek refuge in systems that promise order, stability, and protection against threats. For this order to operate efficiently, individual thought needs to be anesthetized and controlled by authorities. From there emerges the perfect citizen for any authoritarian system: obedient, convinced, incapable of perceiving they serve something. This is the root of the theory. Stupidity isn't passive or simply absence of knowledge. Stupidity is militant, active, aggressive, and defends its convictions with almost fanatical religious fervor. The stupid person doesn't just blindly believe, they defend tooth and nail, repeat tirelessly, fiercely persecutes those who think differently, convinced they're saving the world from imaginary evil forces. They don't need scientific evidence or logic. The authority of who instructed them is enough. And here's the most disturbing point of this analysis. Intelligence isn't a barrier against this condition. In fact, it's frequently a tool that the stupid person uses to justify their irrational and dangerous beliefs. The elaborate and sophisticated discourse, carefully selected biased references, the selective use of apparently impeccable logic, all of this mobilized in favor of an idea never really examined with true intellectual honesty. This is the most dangerous stupidity of all, one that holds university degrees, that articulates beautifully, that accumulates thousands of followers on networks, that publishes articles in respected outlets, but that doesn't think. Only echoes what it's been taught, and the louder the echo, the more convinced it becomes. Bonhoeffer was right to fear this invisible force, because it transforms entire societies into fields of obedience, where those who dare to think are insane, and those who follow blindly are virtuous and exemplary. This is what makes this theory so uncomfortable. It points not to others, but inward. Bonhoeffer's theory, born from ethical and historical observation, today finds validation in what's most advanced. In modern psychology and neuroscience, what he intuited in 1943, science explains with precision. Let's begin with the Dunning-Kruger effect, perhaps the most emblematic of all phenomena studied in this area. According to this phenomenon, the less a person masters a subject, the more confident they tend to be. Ignorance doesn't generate uncertainty or intellectual humility, but unshakable conviction and dangerous cognitive arrogance. The incompetent person is incapable of recognizing their own limitation, and precisely because of this becomes vocal and evangelizing. The classic social conformity experiments, like those of Solomon Asch in the 1950s, are revealing. They demonstrate how group pressure leads individuals to deny even what their eyes clearly see. In the experiment, a group participated in a simple visual test. Identify which of 3 lines corresponded to the reference. The correct answer was obvious to any person with normal vision, but the participant didn't know this. All the others were arranged to give deliberately incorrect answers, creating intense artificial social pressure. The result was shocking. More than 70% of participants yielded to group pressure, deliberately choosing the wrong answer just to fit in socially and not appear different from others, Asch wrote. The tendency to conform to group opinion is so powerful and irresistible. Many prefer to be wrong with others than to be right alone and be seen as strange or different. This experiment reveals an uncomfortable truth. The fear of being outside the group is stronger than being correct. The need to belong, to not stand out, to not seem strange, leads intelligent people to abandon discernment. This is exactly what Bonhoeffer feared, not stupidity as ignorance, but as active and militant conformism. To this is added confirmation bias, a cognitive flaw where people seek only what confirms. They interpret and remember information that confirms their beliefs, completely ignoring the rest that contradicts their convictions. The internet is paradise for this bias. Algorithms deliver exactly what the user wants to hear always. The result is an infinite mirror of unshakable certainties, each within their hermetic, impermeable bubble, feeding their stupidity with personalized data that confirms everything they already believed before starting. More recently, neuroscience studies show that when faced with information that challenges beliefs, the brain reacts intensely. It reacts with the same areas activated when experiencing real physical pain, measurable and intense in the body. In other words, thinking differently literally causes biological suffering, not just psychological, but physical and measurable too. That's why many prefer the comfortable simplicity of repetition to the demanding discomfort of reflection. Another experiment that validates Bonhoeffer's intuitions is Stanley Milgram's famous obedience study. It's conducted in 1961 to understand how far an ordinary person would go when instructed by a legitimate authority, even if it meant causing pain to another human being. The results were terrifying for all involved. 65% of participants applied potentially lethal shocks, simply because an authority figure instructed them to do so without hesitation or additional explanation. They sweated, trembled, visibly hesitated in anguish, but obeyed until the end of the experiment anyway. Even when the victims screamed desperately in pain, even when they seemed to faint or even die. Milgram concluded, the essence of obedience consists in the fact that a person sees themselves as an instrument to realize another's desires, and therefore doesn't feel responsible for the acts. This experiment doesn't just validate Bonhoeffer's theory, it dramatizes it perfectly before our eyes. It shows that ordinary people, without sadistic or perverse traits, are capable of collaborating with evil, simply because they outsourced their moral conscience. Not because they're bad, but because they stopped thinking critically. Most disturbing, The volunteers weren't fanatics or inhuman monsters. They were ordinary and respectable citizens. Dedicated teachers, loving housewives, competent engineers, people like you and me in our lives. Stupidity, therefore, isn't absence of intelligence or cognitive incapacity, but absence of active moral conscience. It's following orders without questioning, believing authorities blindly, repeating speeches without any critical judgment. And when this becomes the accepted social norm, any atrocity can be easily legitimized. With phrases like, "I was just doing what I was told, just following superior orders." Today's stupidity isn't a historical accident or evolutionary flaw. It's a deliberate product and calculated project. It's working perfectly as planned by those who profit from it every day. We live in the era of mass distraction. While you read this, companies exist measuring everything about you. Platforms and algorithms measuring your attention time, your emotions, your clicks, minute by minute, and adjusting in real time what you see, feel, and subtly believe without realizing. Modern stupidity no longer needs military dictators with tanks and weapons in city streets. It is qualified interface designers, charismatic content creators, sympathetic and attractive influencers we follow. It doesn't impose by brute force. It seduces with promises of belonging and constant social validation. The logic is simple and brutal. The less you think, the more predictable you become mathematically. The more predictable, the more manipulable by persuasion techniques known and tested in specialized laboratories. And the more manipulable, the more profitable for those selling products, ideas, candidates, or lifestyles. This equation governs everything from social media feeds to political speeches formatted as memorable slogans. The system doesn't want you to think deeply about anything. It just wants you to react emotionally and quickly. Observe social media algorithms carefully. They prioritize what generates intense and immediate emotional engagement. Constant fear, uncontrollable anger, performative moral indignation, emotions that completely and automatically shut down analytical thinking, and activate the primitive herd instinct we inherited from our ancestors of the African savannas. Predictable result: millions of people defending causes they don't minimally understand in their real complexity, attacking enemies that don't exist outside their screens, taking positions in conflicts they can't even explain. But it's not just digital technology that operates this infernal machine of collective stupidity production. The stupidity machine also operates through education that teaches memorization, but not questioning. Through media that simulates plurality, but only varies the tone of the same dominant hegemonic narrative always. Through culture that transforms any legitimate disagreement into hate speech that must be immediately canceled. Through entertainment that trades complexity for instant stimulus and immediate gratification without effort or reflection. It's a system that rewards those who shout loudest, but systematically silences those who think with depth. That idolizes quick and superficial opinion, but demonizes careful and overly pondered critical judgment. That transforms any attempt at deeper analysis into unbearable elitism, intellectual arrogance, or lack of empathy. We're surrounded by social engineering that promotes stupidity, not as an accidental failure, but as an ideal behavior model for the contemporary citizen perfectly adapted to the system. The distracted, polarized, reactive, and emotionally unstable citizen is the perfect customer for the market. It's the perfect voter for demagogic politicians, the perfect employee for corporations that don't want internal questioning. And the question imposes itself with the weight that Bonhoeffer would certainly approve if he were alive today. How many of your ideas are still truly yours? How many of your thoughts weren't implanted by algorithms, celebrities, journalists, or influencers you don't even know? In a world where superficiality is celebrated as virtue, the silence of doubt became unacceptable scandal. Questioning became personal affront against the collective, and thinking became a radical act of dangerous rebellion. Yes, radical, because truly thinking requires courage that few possess or consciously cultivate today. It's not enough to have a ready opinion about everything. One must excavate to the point where opinion dissolves. Where you no longer have comfortable certainties, only more difficult and uncomfortable questions that have no answer. This deeply frightens, this socially isolates, this charges a high price in relationships and professional opportunities. Those who truly think feel in their skin the discomfort of always being at the margin of general consensus. Feel the anguish of perceiving that the majority is wrong, and that perhaps you are too. Feel the loneliness of not fitting in any prefabricated ideological box, of not having an organized fan base, of not receiving easy applause or constant validation from social networks that everyone so desires and pursues. But thinking in this time is also subversive, because it challenges the logic of the cultural production machine, because it refuses the speed of the infinite feed, because it demands pause, silence, deep and prolonged contemplation. Everything the system deeply detests, everything the market doesn't easily or profitably monetize, everything politics doesn't accommodate in its simplistic campaign speeches or ideological propaganda. And that's why those who think come to be seen as a real threat to the system's functioning. As intellectual, arrogant, as difficult to deal with and control as outside the reality shared by all. Because thinking dismantles carefully constructed narratives, and narratives are the main food of organized and systematized stupidity. But there's something even more disturbing about thinking today. Thinking today isn't just difficult, it's dangerous. Have you noticed how certain ideas can't even be mentioned without the crowd reacting violently? As if it were a capital crime against humanity just to pronounce certain words or question certain dogmas? Have you noticed how the discourse of good has become the new, implacable, and cruel medieval inquisitorial tribunal? Where there's no space at all for delicate nuances, historical context, or interpretive ambiguity that every complex theme requires. We're living in a time when the greatest possible heresy is thinking with true independence and autonomy, where thought became serious transgression, where the search for truth was traded for immediate social validation. And the cost of resisting this is high and painful. You'll lose followers on social networks. You'll be misunderstood by friends and family, perhaps publicly canceled and humiliated on networks. You'll be more solitary, more restless, more uncomfortable in social environments where everyone automatically agrees with everything. But you'll also be truly free, authentic in your essence, unbreakable in your convictions tested by fire. Because when you recover your autonomy of thought, no one else can control your mind or manipulate you. Bonhoeffer, writing from prison while awaiting execution, understood this perfectly with impressive crystalline clarity. He knew that thinking is dangerous for those who think, and for the system too. But he also knew that not thinking is fatal for humanity, for freedom, and for dignity. And now, you know this too. You carry this knowledge that can no longer be erased from you. You've made it this far in this uncomfortable intellectual journey. That alone already places you outside the average. Because this isn't easy content to digest, it doesn't offer quick solutions or magic formulas. It doesn't deliver a convenient external villain for you to hate and blame for everything wrong in the world. It points inward, to the place where the most effective stupidity usually hides silently, in the comfort zone. In the comfort zone of your own mind, in your unexamined certainties, in your inherited opinions. What Bonhoeffer left us wasn't just a historical warning about the distant and safe past. It was a current choice that each person needs to make today. Think or obey, question or repeat. He showed that stupidity, when it installs itself deeply, doesn't need weapons or explicit violence. It only needs complicit silence, constant repetition, good intentions, never critically examined. Of good people who become agents of evil without realizing it, just because they stopped thinking. Because they delegated their conscience to authorities, celebrities, algorithms, or charismatic leaders who promise simple certainties. And what remains for us now, with this disturbing knowledge? We must actively resist, courageously think, constantly question, even when this makes us unpopular at parties and social gatherings, especially when this makes us so. Rescuing thought is no longer an optional virtue or intellectual hobby. It's an urgent existential necessity. A gesture of intellectual survival in times of industrial production of collective and systematically organized stupidity. Because in this historical time we live, maintaining lucidity is an act of peaceful civil disobedience. And critical consciousness is the last free territory in a society that has commercialized absolutely everything. Even the human mind, even thoughts, even the most intimate dreams and desires we consider ours. So, the final question isn't whether you intellectually understood Bonhoeffer's reflections on functional stupidity. The real and urgent question is, are you willing to bear the cost of remaining lucid? In a world that generously rewards stupidity with likes, followers, money, and power over obedient masses? Because now you know the truth, and knowing charges a high price that not everyone is willing to pay. But there's something more dangerous than paying this price of lucidity. It's pretending you didn't hear. It's pretending you didn't hear this urgent call to wake up, to go back to sleep with the comfortable illusion. Go back to sleep with the illusion that it's still you who thinks, when in reality, you just repeat. Waking up is uncomfortable, painful, solitary, and frightening. But continuing anesthetized is the true fatal existential risk. Don't look away now. Don't hide behind excuses or temporarily tranquilizing rationalizations. Don't return this consciousness that just awakened in you as if it were an unwanted gift. It's yours and always was. It was just asleep, waiting to be rescued from oblivion and alienation. And perhaps it's all that truly remains yours in this world of copies and simulacra.